Welcome back to part 2 of how to make your own custom Stray Kids light stick insert, and I'll show you the step-by-step needed to make this exact insert. So if you didn't know it already, this is made using a 2-part epoxy resin, and the brand I like to use is called Resonate. This is a Canadian brand. I ordered this from their website, and the type that I like to use is the Clear Coat Ultra Cast resin. This is a 2-part resin. You also need UV resin. This is the brand that I use. I use Che Diction UV resin, which I purchased online. I bought myself a big bottle, which you don't have to. They also come in a smaller bottle like this that you can get. I like to refill my small one because this is much easier to work with. Since we are working with resin, which is highly toxic, I recommend some protective gears for yourself. So I have on gloves already. And this is the mask that I normally use. This is a bit of an overkill if you're planning on making only 1 or 2 for yourself. Any type of N95 mask would do as long as you are working in a well-ventilated area. Some eye protection, so get yourself a goggle. Okay. You also need some sandpaper. I have the 120 grit, the 320, and I also have the 1000. You need an LED lamp. This one I just got online. This is for your nails. You need a scale, some wet wipes for cleanup, some plastic cups for mixing your resin, and some popsicle stir stick. You can get these at your dollar store. And if you don't want to use that, you can also use the reusable silicone mixing cups. You can just get these online. Some tape. A pair of scissors. X-Acto knife. Some toothpicks. These are optional. Some tweezers. Paintbrushes. Some rubbing alcohol for general cleanup. Some acrylic paint. Today we're going to use white and red. You can just get any type of acrylic paint, it doesn't matter. Now to make this design today, I also have some nail art accessories. This is something that you can buy online or at your local nail art store. So this one comes in all sorts of like star shapes, moon shapes. I also have some glitters with me. I bought these online. You can go to your local craft store or dollar store to find them. These are some like holographic iridescence. I would say these are like the films or flicks. I also have some less resin mica powder. So these comes in different colors. And I also have a whole box of the less resin mica powder here as well. Since I used to make a lot of these, I just bought a bunch, but you can just buy whichever color you like. So this box comes in all sorts of colors. And for this, today we will need some pink, purple, and yellow. But I think I might add some blue. We'll see. So you'll see here on the insert at the two ends, I have some pink supporting sticks. And this is just to make sure that your insert doesn't snap off while it's spinning inside of your light stick. And I'll show you how to make these as we move along in the video. Okay, let's get started. First thing we're going to do is get our mold from part 1. When this is not in use, make sure you keep it in a Ziploc bag or anything that's airtight to avoid it from drying out, and it'll last much longer. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this tape just to clean it up. Get rid of any lint or any dust on the mold. Okay, next step, we are going to measure our resin. So get your scale, put your cup on top, and I'm going to set my unit to gram. Press again, it will go back to 0. So I'm going to take my resin here. So this needs, based on my calculation, about 20 grams of the resin, because this is a 2-to-1 ratio, so 20 grams of the resin and 10 grams of the hardener. Okay, and now we are just going to mix for 1 to 2 minutes, which is what this brand of resin calls for. And just mix it really well. You don't have to go too fast because that will introduce a lot of air bubbles into the resin like this. It will eventually rise to the top and pop, which is why I really like this brand of resin, the Clear Coat Ultra Cast one, because this is a deep pour, and I believe it's meant for pouring things that are deeper, like more than 2 inches deep. So it's a lot more liquidy in comparison to other types of resin, and it gives me a longer working time before it really starts to harden, which I really like because I like to take my time when I make the inserts. And I find that the color is really nice too. As you can see, this one is not even yellow, and this is over 2 years old. But I kept this away from sunlight. So for comparison, this is one that I made that has been sitting on my windowsill for over 2 years. You can see here, I'll turn it towards the window a little bit. It's actually not bad in terms of the color. This one, I mix it with a bit of white, so it's not clear. But as you can see, the outer rings is a little bit more yellow than the inner ring and the stars, and that's because the outer rings has been coated with the UV resin, and UV resin tends to yellow faster over time. But the J. Diction brand, I find the degree of yellowing, I guess, is slower than other brands. And same with the Resonate resin. It's very high quality. Very clear, minimal air bubble. It is a bit pricey. So if you're just making this for fun, if you're making like 1 or 2 for yourself, you can just use whatever brand of resins that you can get your hands on that's affordable. Okay, now that I have my mold here, and I'll use this one as a reference. So I have the nail art decal here, got the 2 sticks for the ends, and then let me show you quickly how to make the end sticks. So you need acrylic paint. I'm using red and white. And you need toothpicks. I know a lot of people use metals, but I find them to be really hard to cut, and metals only comes in certain colors. So I prefer toothpicks. They're very durable. You can paint them in any colors you want. I have a bunch of them here. We're going to make pink today. Also get yourself some kind of styrofoam or anything that you can stick the toothpicks into. This one I already have painted. But basically all you do is to mix the colors, whatever colors you want. Let me just use this box that I used to make the mold. So put your acrylic paint on. Any kind of acrylic paint works. Mix the paint. Now what I like to do is coat the whole toothpick in paint. You can do 1 or 2 layers. Usually 1 layer is enough. And then just stick them there for them to dry. So I have this one here that is already dried. And then what I do is get an X-Acto knife. Just a small one. Let me move this out of the way. Cut the ends. Kind of score along the toothpick. Once you have that, they snap off pretty easy. And do this for both ends. Okay. Now, I usually cut them to about 1/2 inch. Just make sure they are long enough for you to put in the insert, so just snap them off like this. And then get yourself a piece of sandpaper. Get some sandpaper and just sand the ends so that they're nice and smooth. Just nice and flat. And then just paint them. So I paint one end first. And then stick it back into the styrofoam for it to dry, and then do the other ends after. Then once it's done, you should have yourself something like this, where it's coated in paint on all sides. And I just put them in this little glass vial that I have. And today I will be using yellow, pink, blue, and purple mica powder to mix in. And I also have some glitters with me. And some of these holographic glitter or films that will change color in the sunlight. Now I like to use mica powder. Not sure if you can see properly, but once you turn this towards the light, you can kind of see a little bit of shininess in the color itself. Might be a bit harder to see, but in person you can see that. If you don't have mica powder, you can also use acrylic paint mixed into your resin. I don't like using alcohol ink, which some people do. I find that when you expose alcohol ink to sunlight, they fade really fast. And I don't have resin coloring, like resin ink, so I just use mica powder. Now, as you can see, this is starting to become a lot more clear than when I first started mixing. So these are all the air bubbles rising to the top here. This is why I like working with deep pour resin. Gives me more time to play with, because I just think of all these designs as I go. I don't really plan anything. I'm actually going to spray the top a little bit with alcohol, since I want to start pouring this out and start mixing in the colors. Okay, and I'm having a problem with my spray bottle. Okay, much more clear. Okay, so to make the stars, I'm first going to put in some glitter before I pour in the resin. So I got myself here some purple glitters, big and small. I have this little scoop. Just gonna scoop in some of the glitters and just move them around to any desired position. That you like. Okay, I think that should be enough. And then for the ring, I'm going to get some of the flakes. Oh, might be better to use the tweezer. Be careful not to make a mess everywhere like me and not having it go where you want it to go. Okay. And you don't need a lot. A little goes a long way with these. Like, I got more on the outside of the mold than I did inside. Ugh, okay. Okay. Then next, I'm going to add the stars. So we'll do one here and kind of just go around. And just placing them wherever you want. just gonna open this whole thing up. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, next we'll scoop some mica powder into the mixing cups. Since we want the insert to look a little bit translucent, we just need a little bit of powder, not much. And I have the 4-color scoop out here. Have some wet wipes on hand to wipe the tools after, and some dry paper towel there. I also have these tiny mixing sticks that comes with the cups when I purchased them online. I'm not sure if you can see properly here, but all the air bubbles, well, most of the air bubbles, have already popped, so this is pretty clear. And it's starting to thicken a little bit, but not too much. So I'll pour some into each. Make sure I'll have some left over for the star in the middle. Okay. and then just mix it up. This is why I like to use mica powder. It gives you this really nice effects. Okay, now we'll begin pouring. I'm going to add more yellow. I'm not sure if I like the blue together, so we'll see how this turns out. A little bit of powder in there. Now this is why I like to work with this resin, but if you were to work with any other type of resin, you might need to plan ahead of time and do this step really fast. Otherwise your resin will thicken. At this point, it would be way thicker than this. Okay, so I'm gonna pour some more in. None of my inserts looks the same because I just do them as I go and then I forget what I used for them or what color. Okay, now that you have that, we're going to insert this into the point. This is why I like clear. So if you can see here, identify the 2 points of the star. Press on them, you see that big air bubble coming out. You can pop it, which I'm having a hard time. Get a chopstick. Sorry, not chopstick, toothpick, and just pop it. Once you press it, the air bubble comes out. Pop it, and then when you release, the resin will goes inside. So this is why I like working with clear mold. As you can see here, a little bit of the blue color already went inside there. So make sure you do this first, and then take the stick. Then push it in. This way you sort of coat the stick with resin prior to pushing it in. And that will give it more support. So just push all the resin out, all the air bubbles out. Then insert the stick. And at this point, you can use the tweezer and move things around in there. There we go. Really push it in so that it stays in place. I also press on the points while I do this to make sure that all the air bubbles will come out. Okay, now that's that. You can move around all the decoration as you wish. And then I do the same for the ring. Just kind of go along the edges and start pressing. So if there's any air bubbles stuck, it will get pushed out. See, there's one here. Then just make sure resin gets inside. And since this is clear, it's pretty easy for me to see where the bubbles are. I mean, if you're okay with air bubbles, it's fine, but I just like to do this to get as much of them out as possible. So as I do this, as I press on the edges, use a toothpick and just kind of get the bubbles away. Okay, and then you can also use the toothpicks to mix the colors as well. And then do the same technique earlier at the point. So just press down, make sure the air bubbles comes out, and resin goes inside the points of your stars. Might be hard for you to see with the camera, but as I'm pressing, air bubbles are coming out from the points, and I'm just using the toothpick to move it away. Push it away from the points. And just make sure you have resin inside of each point instead of air bubbles. I would say this might be one of the more time consuming part of this whole thing. And I can see air bubbles at the surface here, so I'll just do a quick spray with alcohol just to pop them. And then since it's quite messy, I'll just use a toothpick here to just kind of scrape whatever resin that's on the surface back into the mold. That would help later on with cleanup as well. Let's kind of clean up the edges. We don't want resin spilling over because then it will take longer to sand once it's cured. So what I'm doing is just scraping up all the excess. Same with the ring. Honestly, I'm just making it look harder than it is. This is what you do if you want a nice insert with minimal air bubbles. Okay. Now, because of the resin that I use, it takes longer to cure. So I will have to leave this overnight, and I'll continue to check back on them. Because at the halfway point where right now this is quite liquidy, so if I were to do the other side, see how I have stars as well. If I were to put the stars on top right now, it will just sink right in. So I have to wait for it to get a little bit harder for me to add the stars on top. I have quite a bit of leftover here. Usually I make multiple at once, so I would use this for my next insert. But if you just have a tiny bit, I suggest to just clean up using alcohol wipes or wet wipe, just wipe it off. Or you can wait for it to dry and then the resin will peel right off. But sometimes when you have little bits and pieces like this, it might be harder to peel off, and then you might need to use tape to actually get them to unstick. So I like to just wipe them right away with wet wipes. Okay, so I've let the resin cure overnight. It's still not 100% cure. If I were to press on it, it'll make an indent. So this is a perfect time to add the rest of the decoration onto this side of the insert. Okay, now that's done. We'll wait for it to dry completely before we take this out of the mold. Okay, now that this has been completely cured, let's take it out of the mold. Be careful when you do this step for the stars. Make sure you slowly pull away at the points so they don't break. Oh. Now, as you can see here, some of the accessory that I put on top have fell off, and it didn't completely stick to the resin while it was curing, but this is totally fine. I'll show you how to fix this because we are going to be covering the ring in a layer of UV resins. So this is an easy fix. And if you look closely here, you can see some air bubbles. It's very minimal. So I can sand some of this off, but the rest I would just keep. I mean, it's not a big deal with air bubbles unless it's very noticeable. I wouldn't care. Sometimes for some of my insert, I actually prefer to have air bubbles in them for some of the design. But yeah, it still looks quite nice. Okay, so now we are going to be sanding the insert. Now we only need to sand one side because as you can see on the other side here, it should look perfect. You shouldn't need to sand anything. So I'll show you here on the side. You see how the side that was facing the top has rough edges, so we'll be sanding the edges. And any of these air bubbles that you can see that you don't want, you can sand that off as well. Now I would just use a regular sandpaper, but if you can find one of these drill, I just buy this online, that would be better too. It'll be faster, but you don't necessarily need it. So I usually do this over the sink because I wet sand them, but since I'm showing you on here, I just have a cup of water here and I'll just be wetting my sandpaper. Make sure you wear a mask for this part. You don't want to be breathing in any of the resin dust. So just start sanding around the edges. It doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to put a layer of UV resin on top. So that would cover up any unevenness, any mistake. So just go around the edges just to sand off any sharp edges that you can see. I'll just Give it a bit more sanding. Okay. So once you are satisfied with it, make sure you let it have time to dry completely. I'll just use some paper towel to wipe it, but I usually let this dry out before I start putting UV resin on. And while I was sanding, this small star fell off, so I'll put it back on later. It's an easy fix. So that's for the ring. And then as for the stars, once again, go around the edges. Now this one had air bubbles when I was making it at the points here. So as you can see, they're not sharp. I think I will switch it out to something that I have lying around. Let's see, I have this one. I think it will look good with it if I do 2 different colors. One side will be blue, the other side will be purple. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. I'm just gonna do that. That's why I really like to make my mold the way it is, because once it's done, I can just mix and match and see whether I like them or not. Okay, so once you go around the edges, as you see here, do you see the tip of the stars? There's like a little nub here, and that's because on the real insert it has this, because it has the hole that it just like clicks in, but we don't want that. So we will file this off. And this is very important. You need to file this off, so then once we put the 2 sides together, it will sit flush with each other. I'm going to turn this on. This step is much easier if you have one of these. Okay, that's good. Now, because these 2 halves, once you put it together in the compass, you see how there might be some gaps in between. So to minimize that, I usually, again, get your sandpaper and sand it like this. So then the base is more flush. I'm gonna get a bigger piece here. Get it as flush as you could. Now I know in the beginning I show you 3 different sandpapers, but really I only use the roughest one. If you would really want to be a perfectionist, you can keep sanding and start with the roughest and go to the smoother sandpaper for a more smooth finish on the sides. Okay, as you can see, sand it so then the surface of the star, try to get it as even as you could. That would minimize the gaps once you put the two sides together, but otherwise, if you can live with the gaps, it's fine. And then give it a wash and let it completely dry before we move on to the next steps. Okay, so now this is completely dry. We are going to be assembling it. I have my UV resin here. So first we are going to be putting on the stars. Now I have quite a bit of air bubbles in this ring just because I did this quickly, so a lot of air bubbles were introduced, but if you were to do it properly and slowly, you would get something a little more clear like this. You see there's like barely any air bubbles here. This is not because of my resin, it's because of the way that I was making it. So let's put it together. Now if you notice, you'll see 4 holes in the inner rings, and these are the holes that the star clicks into on the actual compass. So I usually like to put the star's points around the holes just to sort of cover it a little bit. So that's what we're going to do here. There, you line it up like that. And then I have my UV lamp right here, just a little bit out of frame. So I'll put a little bit of resin, UV resin, just a dab onto the corners, and then put one side of the star on. Like that. Okay, now that's done. Get you a close up here. You'll see some shininess from the UV resins versus the actual epoxy resin. The inner ring is not quite shiny. It's a bit more matte. So yeah, that's pretty secure. Now we do the other side. So try to kind of line it up first, and then once you kind of have that, then I usually do the same, just a little dab. And then I also put a little bit onto the star itself as well. Now, putting UV resin on the star will only work if this is a little bit opaque or transparent, because if you have resin, if this is colored, the light won't get to it, and then it won't get clear. Anything in between would not be clear. Okay, so now you put it together. Make sure it's lined up. Press it down. Press both sides together while you're doing this, like that. And then hold it while you pop it into the machine. Let it cure for another 20 minutes. Give you a close-up. Now this is perfectly attached and is fine. Sometimes I also add a little bit more UV resin onto the point just so then they're a bit more secure, but that's optional. This is pretty good. It won't come off. Like, it's pretty hard. Okay. And then there's one more step that I almost forgot. On one side, you see the Stray Kids wording. I am going to be coloring them in gold. So I got some gold color acrylic paint here, and you can do any color you want. So what I do is just get some paint and a paintbrush. Brush the top. Just kind of do this motion so then the paint goes inside of the indent. Okay, see? Then get some paper towel and just wipe off the excess paint. You can use some water if it helps. And there you go. Now we're going to add UV resin on top. Let me zoom in a little bit. Oh. Never mind, I think that's my max zoom. So, take a little bit of resin, just go around the edges. Sorry, not the edges, directly on top. Like that. Let me hold it up so you can see it better. You see how the resin is sitting on top here, and then I like to just use a toothpick and just kind of spread them so they cover the whole entire surface of the ring. Just go towards the edge, but make sure they don't go over the edges. Just kind of spread them, and then you can already see the colors of the glitters and the details and the pigments are coming through at the steps. And just add more resin if it doesn't spread enough. Okay, so this has been cured for, I did a minute or a minute and a half, and it comes out pretty hard around the edges. So as you can see on this side, this is the the side that I still need to work on. But once you put the layer of UV resin on top, it has this nice glossy finish. And then facing the sunlight, you can see all of the detail of the glitters and the subtle mica powder coming through. And this looks way better in person. Okay, now I'll do this side. For this side, since it's the side that was facing up from the mold, it is a bit more uneven, so I will put a bit more resin on top. So do a generous layer. And then I'll do the same thing. Spread them around the edge. And for this one, I will add back all of the accessory that fell off. So Okay, so this is what you get after it's been cured on both sides. Nice layer of UV resin on either side there, in comparison with the reference. So this is a lot darker, has a bit more pigment in them. There you go. And now I'll just open up my existing light stick here and put it in and see how it looks. There you go. Let's see if I can make this spin. Okay, what you just heard was the crash because I did not put it on properly. But yeah, this has just been flung across the room and it's still intact. Let me do this again. There you go, managed to make it spin a little bit. This, if you don't know already, it will be harder to make these spin than the original insert because they have some weight on one side of it. If you take the original and put a flashlight to one side, you'll see that along like one half of it, you'll see kind of fall 4 balls, and those were the weights. So then it's heavier on one side, and because of the material too, that's plastic, is way easier to spin than these. These are like straight up resin. So, but they look much nicer. And there you go.